space is quite vast.
We're receiving a signal.
On audio, Lieutenant.
Oh my God, it's full of stars.
Doc, you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
Prepare ship for ludicrous speed.
Into the limitless boundaries of space.
It's in the name of science.
Absolutely marvelous.
The latest result in machine intelligence.
God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Man creates dinosaurs. I am your father. The podcast from Planet X.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast from Planet X. My name is Ben, and with me today, as always, is my co-host David.
What's up, guys?
So this episode, we are covering the final part in the Back to the Future trilogy, aka Back to the Future Part 3. But before we get into the episode proper, we kind of have an announcement to make about the future of the show. So behind the scenes, we have been working with one of our friends, Anthony from Something Ghoulish, to start another podcast, kind of based on the same thing that we're doing here. This isn't a full-on announcement or anything. We're not announcing necessarily exactly what we're doing or when it's coming out, but we are announcing that this show is ending because of production on this new show. So this isn't the final episode. We do have one more episode that we're going to record after this. But I don't know. It's weird to say goodbye to something that we've been doing for this long. I mean, this podcast hasn't even been going on as long as our other one, our podcast period, has been. I don't know. It feels weird to end something that David and I have both worked really hard on, but we also know our limits, and we know that with production ramping up on this new podcast, we're not going to be able to do both, unfortunately. So we are ending this one, but with the promise that we're going to come back in a new and different and better form.
It's going to be exciting.
Yes. David and I are both very, very, very excited. We've been working for an extremely long time, making sure that every detail is going to be absolutely perfect for this new show. So,
along with some amazing help from our friends. So
we'll get into all that once. Yeah, we're going to record an announcement for this feed for anybody who might still be watching it once the new show finally comes out with more details. But for now, know that while this show is ending, we are eventually going to be coming back in one form or another. So,
and we still have podcast period that we will continue to do. So
yeah, we're not getting rid of podcast period anytime soon. So you can always look out for that. We'll have a link to that in the show notes if you guys haven't seen it or heard it. So anyway, now let's get into the episode proper. If you wouldn't mind starting us off with a synopsis, David.
Alrighty. So in this final chapter, Marty McFly obtains a 70-year-old message from the time-traveling Dr. Emmett Brown, in which he informs Marty that he has retired to a small town in the Old West. Marty then finds out that the doc was murdered shortly after sending the letter. In order to save his friend, Marty will travel back in time, disentangle a love-struck doc from a local school... What?
School marm, I think is the word.
What does that mean?
School teacher? I don't know, dude.
Okay, school marm is the word. School
Yes,
marm?
school
Yes?
marm.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
all right. Marty will have to travel back in time, disentangle a love-struck doc from a local school marm, and repair the DeLorean, all while avoiding a posy. Just seeing how many ways I could see that. A posse of gunslingers. Yes, I knew how to say it, Ben. Don't worry.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. Let's just say that. Anyway. All right, so cast and crew is going to read much like the last couple of movies has. Back to the Future Part 3 stars Michael J. Fox as Marty McFly / Seamus McFly, Christopher Lloyd as Emmett Brown, Mary Steenburgen as Clara Clayton. It's the one newbie to the cast. Well, the biggest newbie to the cast, I should say. Thomas F. Wilson as Buford Mad Dog Tannen / Biff Tannen, and Leah Thompson as Maggie McFly / Lorraine Baines McFly. The film was directed by Robert Zemeckis and written by Bob Gale and scored again by Alan Silvestri.
Alrighty, so what were your initial thoughts on the movie, Ben?
We're going to get more into them as in a couple of the points that we've got. But for now, we'll say that I did enjoy the film, and honestly, I enjoyed it a lot more than I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would from what I remembered about this movie. I didn't think this movie was bad, but I also thought that it was like, I don't know, I guess a lesser than as far as the trilogy goes. And while it's still not my favorite out of the trilogy, in fact, it's still probably this is bad wording for it, but it's the only wording I've got. It's my least favorite of the trilogy. It's still a darn good movie, and I still really enjoyed watching it.
I think I'm in your camp with that. I like the movie in general. It's definitely in third place, and that's not a bad thing. When it comes to these movies, there's going to be a first and there's going to be a third. And there's no crime in this being third place. It just is. I think the other two are better. And which one is better, we've had our thoughts on that. And you can have different discussions, but I solidly believe, and I don't think there's any way that somebody could change my mind, number 3 is in third place. Still a good movie, though.
Yeah, I feel you. All right, so let's get into our first point. The inclusion of Mary Steenburgen may throw you guys back to our very first episode. Not intentionally either, because we didn't really exactly have a tap down plan as far as how we were picking movies when we had like the first couple of episodes go out. So it's just extremely coincidental that we happened to watch time after time, and also the Back to the Future trilogy before the show ended. So anyways, that's what our first point is about.
Movies
no kidding.
On the list.
We could have the last 3 or these last few episodes could have easily been anything else.
Yep. But
I guess it was fate that we ended up landing on Back to the Future, and that we ended up just doing the entire trilogy in one go instead of waiting to do them. So anyway, commentators notice parallels between the film Time After Time and Back to the Future Part 3. Mary Steenburgen has said, "Actually, I played the same scene in Time After Time and in Back to the Future Part 3. I've had a man from a different time period tell me that he's in love with me, but he has to go back to his own time. My response is, in both cases is, of course, disbelief, and I order them out of my life. Afterwards, I find out that I was wrong, and that, in fact, the man is indeed from another time, and I go after them to profess my love. It's a pretty strange feeling to find yourself doing the same scene so many years apart for the second time in your career. The casting of Steenburgen for Back to the Future 3 appears to be deliberately intended to mirror the earlier role. In Time After Time, the woman lives in the 20th century and the time travelers from the 19th. In Back to the Future Part 3, the woman inhabits the 19th and the time travelers from the 20th. In both films, the woman eventually goes back with the time traveler to live in his own time period. How is Mary's role different in Back to the Future Part 3 from the one that she had in Time After Time?
I think the biggest difference, and the one that would be the most shell shock, would be the fact that in Time After Time, she goes back. And it's something I don't know. I don't know how. Doc, he adjusted pretty well. But it was also noted that, I think it was in the second one, he mentioned that the Old West just happened to be his favorite time period. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise that he fit in so well, but he did. He adapted pretty well. I don't know that I could say that about everybody, though. And just going back in time, I feel like there's just a standard of living that you're accustomed to. And it would be such a hard thing for me to do, and I think a lot of people, to go back that far and to not have that same standard of living. I mean, you don't have modern indoor plumbing, refrigeration, and HVAC and all that stuff. That's not a thing. So I feel like it'd be easier somewhat to go forward in the future. Just because at least there's not. I'm sure there's going to be a difference in the standard of living.
At least you're not giving up something.
Exactly, you're not giving up anything. You might be gaining a lot of stuff, but you're not giving anything up. And if anything, I feel like it'd just be easier to live in the future than it would be in the past.
Yeah,
that's my biggest takeaway.
I think the biggest difference is the way. I mean, obviously, it's two different characters. She's not playing the same character in both movies.
Yeah.
But in Time After Time, she seems to be a lot more, I suppose outgoing would be the right word, because she goes after Wells, like, super hard.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And, I mean, it's not like she's not reciprocating things with Doc, but it's also, she's not, like, necessarily going out of her way to be noticed by him. Like she brings over her telescope and she asks him to the fall festival thing.
Yeah.
But she's not like taking him back to her house and trying to make out with him or whatever, which she does in Time After Time.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's more. I don't know if that could be contributed to a cultural difference, considering the massive time difference, or if it was just more of a personality character difference, or if it's a combination of the two.
I think it's probably a combination of both, because, like I said, she's not necessarily playing the same character.
No,
and she's also playing this character from a different time period. But considering that they were meant to mirror each other, I thought the difference in personality was probably the most interesting difference, in my opinion.
Yeah, I could say that for sure. I could see that point.
All right, what's next?
Alrighty, so many critics agree that while the movie is still good, it is the weakest and most forgettable out of the trilogy. What is your opinion on this?
I would say that it's probably the weakest, but I don't want to say that it's the most forgettable. I mean, this I would say I have more things that I remember about this movie than some of the than one or two. I mean, I definitely remember like plot points about two, and the fact that they go to the future and everything. But I can remember specific like pieces of music, like that fall festival tune that ZZ Top is playing when they're at the fall festival. Um, I remember Marty getting dragged around by the rope and almost getting hanged, and I remember the joke uh, about Doc only being able to handle one shot of whiskey and having to be woken up with that like disgusting concoction thing. So I like I said, I would agree that it's probably the weakest out of the three, but it's definitely not the most forgettable. I would say it's one of the more rememberable movies, more memorable movies. There we go. Blech.
I guess it just depends on maybe the mindset, because while I agree it's not necessarily the best, I don't want to call it the weakest. But it is. I there should be a better word to use, and there probably is.
I'm with you.
But the context is correct. It is the least I guess put together out of the three is another way that you could put it. As far as it being the most memorable or the least memorable or anything like that, I think for me the sequencing is more memorable in this movie. I have a hard time remembering the events of 2 specifically. 1 is kind of easy. You get to the mall, you get back to the past, you get back to the future.
1 is pretty straightforward. 2, I understand where you're coming from.
You jump around a lot more in 2
they go to the future, and then they go back to the past, and then they go back to the past,
and
then they go back to the present.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the sequencing is a little bit more straightforward in 3. So as far as that being more memorable, I would say 3 is more memorable than 2. With that being said, I remember specifics better in 2. I don't remember the sequencing. I can't remember what is next, but I remember the events more in 2 than I do 3. 3, and I don't think it's the fact that I remember less in 3. I think there's just less to remember. It's not as action-packed, I think, as 2 is, for example. I mean, the biggest hurdle they have, besides the whole shootout at 8 a.m., is the train sequence.
Yeah.
Which is straightforward. We hijack a train, we set it off onto a second line, and then we throw in the logs, and we got biff, bam, boom, poof of smoke, and we accelerate faster. That's pretty straightforward, and I think there's just less to remember, just because there's less going on. So it just depends on how you cut the cake, I guess, because everybody's opinion could be different.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I still think this is more memorable than the other two, in my opinion. But it could also be that I've seen this part for whatever reason more than I have seen the other two. So
maybe. I don't know. I guess it just depends on how you cut the cake. Is it more memorable? It's probably easier to remember sequencing.
Yeah.
So it might be easier. Is it less memorable? I think there's just less to remember. So cut it however you want on that one, I guess is my take.
Yeah. All right. This movie is very different to the other two in the trilogy in that we go extremely far back into the past. It takes the Old West motif to 11, with it even including a few famous Western actors such as Harry Carey Jr., Dub Taylor, and Pat Buttram, Younger audiences may know Buttram for his extensive voice work, particularly as the Sheriff of Nottingham in the Disney version of Robin Hood. Thomas F. Wilson, who played Buford Tannen, even chose to perform his own stunts and spent a great deal of time learning to ride a horse and throw his lasso. Do you prefer this setting to the others explored in the trilogy?
I think as far as authenticity, or well, maybe not authenticity, but just the facts. The past is the past. You should have a clear understanding as to how to portray it. And there's a lot less guess as long as you do your research. Whereas predicting the future is insanely difficult. And while they got some things right, there's some things they haven't even gotten close to getting right. And I like the past more for Hill Valley than I did the future, just because it felt so almost dystopian.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, God forbid, we might end up in that type of future, but it just, something seemed wrong. But I also liked 2015 Hill Valley a lot more than skewed timeline alternate 1985 Hill Valley, where it's basically Hell Valley. So it just depends on which one you take, but I like the past. I liked how they did it. They did a good job with it. It was fun. Some of the references wouldn't necessarily hold up as well today as they did back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Marty's name wouldn't be as funny if you didn't know who Clint Eastwood was. And I'm sure that most people nowadays who are like, I mean, not our age, but like, I don't know, 15, in their teens now, you know, I don't think they would know who Clint Eastwood was.
They might
or is.
not, which is a tragedy in itself. But
I mean, let's see. Hold on. I'm gonna look something up real quick. I want to see when his last movie was. I know he had like Gran Turismo or something like that.
I don't or
remember, Gran Torino. That's what it was.
See Gran Turismo.
Yeah, the last movie that he played in was The Mule. That's in 2018. But I still
don't know what that is.
Yeah. I feel like I remember maybe a couple trailers, but beyond that,
gotcha.
Yeah, there wasn't really much going on with it.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it just depends on how culturally exposed they are. Are they uncultured swines like I tend to be sometimes, depending on what the subject is, or are they pretty well versed in things in the past?
I mean, let's be real. It's going to be based on the personality of the person, and obviously their parents as well, because you know, there could be those parents that are like super into the westerns, which, you know, they would be exposed to Clint Eastwood that way.
Yeah.
But there could also be those parents that are like, don't really care about movies or prefer stuff from nowadays, or prefer an entirely different genre to what Clint Eastwood played.
Yeah.
So and even if their parents aren't necessarily into it, there's always the chance that the kid could be.
Yeah, we could.
But I don't know. It feels like it would be a lot easier to introduce a kid if his parents were into something.
Yeah. You know,
rather than anything else, you know.
Yeah, I hear you. You know, it's a little off topic, and I don't know how recent it is considering recent movies. But you want to know what one of my more favorite Clint Eastwood movies is? Actually, it's not even western.
What?
In the Line of Fire. It's such a good movie.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I watched that one, like over Christmas or something.
Yeah, gotcha.
was pretty sure it was one of the movies that I brought on the plane with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was
I like
good.
that one.
I enjoyed it.
That might be
Yeah.
something that's a little more modern, but just everything else that I know of recently is like
Yeah, but
direct-
even still, that's like what?
oh gosh,
90s?
yeah, long
Yeah.
time ago. Dating ourselves a little bit here.
Yeah. As far as my preference goes, I do enjoy the Western setting. I think it lends itself to this sort of story. Because you get to see these modern characters exist and survive in the Old West setting. I don't know if this is my favorite time period though, as far as storytelling goes. I think my favorite would have to be the alternate 1985.
I think my favorite, as much as I like the West, it's not my favorite setting that they told.
Mhm.
I think my favorite is actually 1955.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I can understand that. I don't know. I'm the only reason I'm saying alternate 1985 was because it was such a twist to see them, even though you kind of knew something was going to happen with Biff flying off in the DeLorean and with the book and everything.
You
It was
wouldn't
still
think it'd
it
be
was still a
that.
shock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that
It was still a
really
shock
did
to
throw
go
you
back
for a
and
loop.
see everything
Uh-huh.
like that. So
Yeah.
that's the only reason why I prefer it to the Old West. Otherwise,
I
this
gotcha.
this setting is the bomb.
Yep.
I enjoyed it a lot.
I gotcha.
All right. Well, should we move on to our last point here?
Yeah, so this movie ends the Back to the Future trilogy. Do you think that it offers a satisfying conclusion?
The only thing that I wish could have happened was that there was more of these movies. Because flying off into the sunset with a freaking flying train is such a tease. It annoys me to no end. But at the same time, I do think it's a good ending for the trilogy of movies that we got. Because it ties everything up into a nice bow. We finally get the conclusion of the whole chicken thing, which I understood it for the second movie, but it felt weird for them to bring it up again in the third movie because you'd think he would have kind of learned his lesson. But I guess it
They didn't do a good job with that, did they? I understand the reasoning for having to bring it up in the third movie because we needed to see the conclusion at the end where the wreck would have taken place had he not learned his chicken lesson. But I'm with you. You'd think he would have learned that in the second one and they needed to carry it forward into the third, but that they need to use it as a plot point to have this stupid Mad Dog Tannen shootout at 8 o'clock scenario.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that would have been the only reason to bring it in was because otherwise, how would Marty show off his shooting skills or whatever? Not that he ever shot Tannen, but
I'm sure there could have been another storyline to bring that forward.
Yeah.
I think the chicken excuse is a little.
There could have been like a shooting contest or
exactly
something. Kind of like they had at the fall festival.
Yeah,
but
yeah, exactly.
I don't know. Anyways, as far as the conclusion goes, yeah, I think it offers a pretty decent conclusion for the trilogy. I just want more.
Yeah,
is the only issue.
It would have been nice that whole idea that Doc somehow managed to cobble together another time machine.
Yeah.
Being stuck in 1885, you would think would be totally unreasonable, and yet he did. And I just would have loved to see more. The kids, bringing in the kids, his children. That
Mhm.
is a whole thing that you could have skewed off into just the life that they lived trying to travel Lord knows where, all the experiences that they had. Like, you could have done so many things. We could have seen a little bit of, like, Marty and Jennifer's future, maybe, now that
Mhm.
Marty didn't have that accident. It's just endless possibilities, and the fact that we got the flying train setting off into the sunset and nothing after that, it's satisfying, but it does leave you wanting more, I think. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, shall we get into our final thoughts?
Yeah, go for it, Ben. I kind of want to hear what you got to say.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've said most of my opinion kind of throughout this episode with the points that we've had. Like I said, it's not necessarily my favorite of the trilogy, but I don't know. I still enjoy it for what it is, and it's not a bad movie. It's just, I mean, and it's certainly better than some of the other movies that we've seen on this podcast. So, I mean, I can't complain there. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really know if there's much more that I can say other than it's a good movie. It doesn't necessarily live up to the other three as far as like the tone and everything goes. This one feels a lot more happy-go-lucky than even the first one did, because you know you have the inevitability of Doc's death
Yeah.
kind of lingering over the whole thing, and then obviously in part 2 you have the alternate 1985.
Yeah.
This one is, like you said, it's very straightforward. There's not really any twists and turns other than the little
Love.
shootout yeah, and the love thing between Doc and Clara. But beyond that, there's not a whole lot to it. It's just very straightforward.
Gotcha.
But
Gotcha.
I kind of think for a conclusion, that's what we needed, you know, just something to tie all of the
Yep.
loose ends together, you know,
Yep.
see our two main characters kind of have this one last adventure,
Yep.
try to make everything right and tie up all the loose ends for both of them.
Yep.
So, yeah. As far as my rating goes, out of 5, I mean, heck, what else can I do? Out of 5 flying trains, I would give this a probably a 4.2. I want to say.
Okay. What about you? All right. So there is one little thing that has always nagged me about this film, and maybe I am not seeing something, or maybe it's what I think it is, and in which case it's like the first major plot hole I can see in any of the films in this trilogy. We see that Marty finds Doc's tombstone in the Hill Valley archives, and it mentions the beloved Clara, right? Yeah. And later on, we discover that Clayton Ravine was named Marty recalls that it was named after a school teacher that fell into the ravine, because they joked that there was a couple of teachers that they might like to throw into the ravine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she obviously fell into the ravine if it was in the archives, correct?
It wasn't in the archives. He just remembered it.
No,
See,
Clayton Ravine being in the archives. It was called Clayton Ravine.
Clayton Ravine was not in the archives. The only reason we know about it was because Marty brought it up.
Okay, well, Marty brought it up, so it obviously was called Clayton Ravine, correct?
Uh-huh.
Okay. How is Clara, the beloved Clara, in this circumstance if she fell into the ravine? Where did Doc save her? They obviously saved her when Marty was there because Marty dragged Doc out into the middle of the blessed wilderness because of the DeLorean issue.
Well, see,
Why
that's
was he
the
there?
thing. That's the thing, though. He was supposed to meet her, like he was supposed to meet her at like the train station or whatever, at first, and then because Marty brings up the beloved Clara thing, he decides not to go, and then they just happen to run into her when she's going to fall off the ravine.
Okay.
So I think he saved her in two different ways. And the way that the Clayton Ravine thing still exists is because, I mean, the Doc didn't save her in the original timeline, like in Back to the Future 1 and 2. So he could have easily still remembered Clayton Ravine because, if you're in a timeline, then you don't lose memories of that timeline. But because Marty goes back and takes part in the creation of the new timeline where Clayton Ravine does not exist anymore, at least in the second version, and he can still remember Clayton Ravine.
No, I'm not arguing the fact that he can remember it. How is Clara, the beloved Clara that erected his tombstone, if she was supposed to be in the ravine?
Because she wouldn't have been. He would have met her at the train station the first time.
Then why is it called Clayton Ravine?
Because she died. Doc wasn't there originally in the past. That's what I'm saying.
So you're saying that he saved her from the train station, at the train station, by meeting her at the train station.
Mm-hmm. Or wherever he was supposed to meet her. I don't remember exactly where, but he was supposed to meet her at some point.
Okay. So that's how that worked then?
Yes. As far as I can tell, yes. Whether or not the timeline shenanigans make sense as far as why Marty can remember the ravine and why it exists in this version of 1985 or 1955 where he looks it up in the archives, that I'm not 100% sure. That might just be a plot hole that we're going to have to gloss over, but they did explain that he was supposed to meet her. And I mean, I assume he would have
had he not skipped
in the first version where he was murdered afterwards.
Okay. Had he not gone with Marty to go do whatever it is that they had to do.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So, if you go by what you said, then it makes sense. I never thought of it that way. I never thought of Doc actually meeting her, and whatnot. That makes sense.
Well, the sheriff guy tells him
I know.
He's
I see where you're
supposed to
coming
meet
from.
her.
I just never thought of it that way.
Okay.
I never thought of it that way. I didn't think that he would save her and then it not be called Clayton Ravine. I was hung up on the fact that it was called Clayton Ravine, meaning she did go in there at some point. I just didn't.
At one point, it probably would have been called Clayton Ravine. Okay. It's just a different timeline. Just like when Marty goes over when he comes back to the future, it's Eastwood Ravine.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Because he went over.
Yes,
or so they think. I mean, the whole train went over. So.
Yeah, you would think.
How else do you explain his death?
Exactly.
He's gone, so he had to die, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So then, with that being said, if it's not a plot hole, that really doesn't change my opinion of the movie. I just wanted to have that discussion. It was something that I forgot when we was looking over this little document we got put together.
Mm-hmm.
I would give it a solid 3.4. Flying.
Really? 3.4?
Yeah. Because I gave the other ones 4s.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I have been rating them a little higher than you have been.
You've been rating them higher the entire time.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the first two were 4.5, and this one was 4.2. So
Yeah, it's about a half a star less than the other two.
yeah,
So yeah, three and a half, somewhere around there.
okay. I suppose that's fair. All right, well, that's pretty much where we're going to end this episode. Next episode, we're probably going to gush again about how the show's leaving or how the show's ending and whatnot. But next episode, we're doing Interstellar as our finale, our show finale. So be lookout for that.
We picked it. That was the one that we decided we are doing this. We know it's our end, and it's something that Ben and I have a bunch of fond memories.
Mm-hmm. We have a history with this movie.
Yes, even if the viewing experience wasn't the best,
was less than stellar.
Yes, exactly. Well, the viewing experience was okay.
The viewing experience was fine. It was the listening experience.
Yes, exactly. It was it was a bit much.
Yeah.
Turn it down.
Needed some earplugs.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Noise canceling headphones wouldn't have canceled that, I felt.
No, not. Anyway, yeah. So be on the lookout for our final episode. Within a couple weeks after this one comes out. Blah 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 blah.
2 weeks, guys. 2 weeks.
All right. With that out of the way, thank you so much for listening. Be sure to leave a rating on whatever podcasting platform you happen to be listening on. And we will see you for our show finale in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast from Planet X. We are hosted, edited, and produced by Ben Mason, and co-hosted by David Knowles. Our theme song is produced by the Tormented Teamster. You can follow Ben on Twitter at BenPlaysVidyaS, that's Ben Plays VIDYAS, and you can follow David on Twitter at Car6x16. If you want to keep the conversation going, you can contact the show on Twitter at PlanetXPod, or by email at podcastfromplanetx@gmail.com. That's all for this episode. We'll see you next time.